Hello and welcome. So you've learned a lot of Swift in the last few lessons. You started with variables and constants and data types, then you learned about functions, and then you learned about structures that you can group all of those things together to represent or model something in your app. Now this lesson is going to be the final piece of the puzzle. I'm not saying you're going to be a Swift master or anything, but by the end of this lesson, you'll see how all of the concepts and code fits together and works together inside of a SwiftUI app. Now, just before I show you that, just in case you're new here, hi, my name is Chris and welcome to Code with Chris, the place to be if you want to learn how to make an app. I have a quick question for you. Is learning Swift easier or tougher than you thought it would be? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below, and on your way down there, please give this video a thumbs up. I super appreciate it and it really helps me out, so thank you. All right, with that said, let's dive right in. All right, so let's start with an empty playground. Do you remember back then when you learned about functions and I taught you how to declare a function by using the func keyword followed by the function name, let's say my function, followed by a set of parentheses and then a set of curly brackets, and inside of the curly brackets we would have the code for the function. But this is just a function declaration. No code is run, nothing happens. It's not until we call the function that the code inside of that function gets executed, right? So I would call the function saying my function and then the parentheses. If I run my playground right now, you can see that it outputs hello into the console. So structures are like that as well. When we declare a structure using the struct keyword followed by the structure name, so let's say my structure, followed by a set of curly brackets, and then we put the code inside of the structure. Let me move my function in here, and let's declare a property up here. Var message equals hello, and then let's print out my property message inside of my function. This is just a declaration of a structure. It doesn't actually do anything. Think of it like a blueprint for a building. In order for us to use this structure, we need to bring it to life. We need to create what's called an instance of the structure. You can think of it like turning this blueprint for a building into an actual building. So how do we go about creating an instance of this structure? Well, that's easy. You just write the structure name followed by a pair of parentheses like that. Now, just in case you're still fuzzy about the concept of creating an instance of a structure, let me give you a couple of different analogies to help you try to understand this concept. Some people find it easier when I say that declaring a structure or the declaration of this structure is kind of like a blueprint for a car or an architecture plan for a house. Using that blueprint or using that architecture plan, I can create cars and I can create houses, and those are the actual objects. Whereas the blueprint or the architecture plan is more of like a template. It simply describes how that thing is going to work once you bring it to life. So that's what's happening right here. This is a declaration of a structure. It describes all of its properties and functions, you know, the things that it can do. And then it's only until we bring it to life by creating an instance of it that we can actually use it. So now that we have created an instance of it, let's explore what we can do with it. Now, first of all, we need to keep track of this instance because it's considered a piece of data. We need to keep track of it and have a way to reference it. So let's create a variable called, I'm just going to call it A for simplicity's sake, and I'm going to assign that new instance to my variable A. Hey, wait a minute. If this instance is a piece of data, then what's the data type of this piece of data? And what data type is this variable holding? Well, the data type is the name of your structure. That's right. So I can actually change my variable declaration from var a to var a colon my structure. Yes, your structure is its own data type. So this instance that you've created, the data type of that is my structure. Now this little instance has superpowers because we've designed it that way. It can hold data in its message property, and it can output that message using the myFunction method. So how can we go about accessing those things of this instance? Well, that's where dot notation comes in. Let's take a look at what dot notation is. So let's reference the variable a followed by a dot or a period. And as you can see from the autocomplete menu, you can choose message, which is accessing the property, or you can select my function, which is going to execute the code in that method. So using dot notation, you can access the properties and the methods of that instance. Let's try this out. So first of all, I am going to assign something to the property of this instance. I am going to assign, let's say, hi. And then I'm going to print out a.message, just to show you that I can indeed access this property and I can print it out. Next, instead of using this print statement here, I'm simply going to call the method of that instance. I'm going to call my function. And I'm going to run this code again. And we still get hi, because the code inside of this method actually just prints out the property. Now this little instance is quite the action hero, isn't it? It can do all of the things that we designed it to do. Now, because this structure declaration is like a blueprint or an architecture plan, that means that we can create as many instances of it as we want. So let's go ahead and create a second instance. This time I'm going to declare another variable, var b, to store another instance of my structure. Now the important thing to note is that these are completely independent instances. Going back to the car blueprint analogy, it's like the car factory made two cars from the same blueprint. Those two cars are treated as two different cars. Same thing here. I've just created two instances of my structure. For example, if I assign a.message to be hi, and then I print out b.message, or let me assign something else to b.message, and I print that out, you'll see that for a.myfunction, calling that method, it prints out hi, and when I print out b.message, it outputs world to the console. So you can see that each instance keeps track of its own values inside the message property. Now you know that you need to create an instance of a structure in order to use it. Let's take a look at how instances of structures can work together. Now, to use an earlier example from the previous lesson, suppose I have a chat view in my app. So I've declared a structure to represent this view. It groups together all of the properties, the view code, and the methods related to my chat view. And suppose that I had another structure to group together all of the networking code or the database code to save the data. Let's declare something like that here. So struct, let's call this the network, or let's call it the database manager. Okay, and suppose that I had a method in here. So func, let's call this save data, and the input parameter for this is the data that we want to save. So let's say let's declare a single parameter called data and make it a string type. And it returns a value. It's going to return a Boolean value, true or false, indicating whether the save was successful or not. True for successful, false for unsuccessful. And in real life, it wouldn't be feasible to really return a result instantly like this, because depending on network conditions and other factors, you don't want to wait around for the data to save. So you don't want execution to stop. But for the sake of simplicity, let's just say that we can return a result right away. So in here, this code saves the data and returns a Boolean result. So in this example, I'm just going to return true. So I'm just going to return a hard-coded value because I'm not going to implement this method. The main thing I want to show you is how the chat view is going to use the database manager to save the message. So back in the chat view, in this send chat method, for example, I could create an instance of the database manager. So let's say var db equals database manager, followed by a set of parentheses. And just like that, I've created a new instance of that database manager. And now if I wanted to save my message, I would call its saveData method. So db.saveData, and I would pass in my message property as the input data. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in message. But remember, when I call this saveData method, it returns a Boolean value for me to indicate whether that save was successful or not. So I can assign the output of that method to a constant. I'm going to call this was success. Right? So I'm going to assign that Boolean output into a new constant called was success. Or maybe I'll just call it successful. And then down here, I can write some code, check the successful Boolean value. If unsuccessful, show alert to user. Now in future lessons, you're going to learn how to write these statements based on conditions, but for now, this comment will have to do. The main takeaway for this example that I'm showing you is the fact that within the send chat method of the chat view structure, it is using another structure's methods by creating an instance of it. So that's how instances of structures can work together to make your app function. And this is essentially all your app is. It's different instances of structures working together to produce the views, to handle the user input, and to run the logic. Now I want to talk about access levels for a second. Suppose, for example, in my database manager, I had some sort of information that I was tracking as a property that only the database manager needed. It wouldn't be relevant to any other structure. Maybe it is a server name or something like that. So let me just write a new property in my database manager called server name, and I will assign to it a string called server1. Now this property wouldn't be interesting to any other structure, but as you can see in the send chat method, I've declared this instance of the database manager. If I write db dot using dot notation, I can access that server name property. And sometimes you might not want to expose these things. So what you can do is you can specify an access level in front of that property. So in front of var server name, that property, I can put the keyword private. So now it becomes private var server name. And by doing this, it keeps that property accessible only within the scope of the database manager. So as you can see, I can still access server name inside of the saveData method, right? It's in the same scope, but in the send chat method of the chat view down here, if I use dot notation again for my instance, you can see that I cannot access that property anymore. I can't see it. And furthermore, you can actually do the same thing with functions. So I can put private in front of the func keyword, and now you can see that Xcode complains I cannot run this method from the send chat method of the chat view. Now it's a good practice to be aware of which properties and methods need to be accessible to other instances and other structures, and mark everything else as private. Doing this is a proactive way to prevent unexpected behavior and bugs from cropping up. All right, and now for the final piece of the lesson, I want to relate everything that you've learned so far back to a SwiftUI app inside Xcode. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now let's go ahead and start a brand new iOS app project. I'm just gonna name this test project and make sure that interface is SwiftUI and lifecycle is SwiftUI app, language is Swift, and we're good to go. So I'm just gonna save this on the desktop, and we're gonna first jump into contentview.swift. Now I'm just going to change this to iPhone 12 and I'm gonna hit resume. But the important part is, the main thing I wanted to show you really is the code, right? Take a look at this. Struct, you know that means that content view is a structure There are some keywords and bits of code that we're going to gloss over for now because we haven't learned that yet, and now is not the right time to go over it. So I will gloss over a couple of things, but I really want to point out the concepts that you have learned so far and show you where they fit in. So this is a structured declaration. Let me just collapse this code for a second. There you go. So you can see that this is a struct. The content view is the structure name, followed by :view. And we're going to get to this in just a second. And then you can see the curly brackets containing all of the code for that structure. All right, so let's expand it again. And let's take a look at what else we've got. Okay, down here, we've got the var keyword. So that's the start of a property. The name of this property is body. Okay, so after that, we've got : and then we've got some view. Now we're going to get to this again in just a second, but you can see that there is a set of curly brackets in here. So that tells you that this is a computed property. So let me collapse the code again, and you can see that indeed this looks like a computed property. Var body, data type, and then a set of curly brackets. Inside is the code that gets computed or calculated to return the value when this property is accessed. So can you see all of these concepts that we learned in the last 4 lessons? Are they coming back? Now I want to talk about this view and some view. So let's talk about this : view in the declaration of the structure first. Judging by how you've used the : before, you might think that this is the data type for the structure, but not quite. That doesn't really make sense, does it? Because remember, the name of the structure itself is the data type for instances of that structure. So what is this : view after the structure name? Well, when you're declaring a structure, the : after the structure name indicates that this structure follows a protocol. In this case, it follows the view protocol. So what do you think about when you hear the word protocol? Well, for me, I think about it as a set of rules or a set of actions. For example, kind of like the fire emergency protocol that a building might have for what to do when a fire occurs. Or like the building code that a house developer has to follow to build a house that is safe. Similarly, in Swift, a protocol is a specification or a set of rules that a structure has to follow. This : view part indicates that this content view follows the view protocol. In formal Swift terminology, content view conforms to the view protocol. Now, one important thing I have to mention is that writing : followed by the protocol is saying and declaring that you conform to the protocol, but do you actually? It's kind of like raising your hand and declaring something, but do you actually follow the rules of that protocol? And so the code inside of this structure actually has to satisfy the specifications for that protocol. In this case, for the view protocol, to conform to it, we have to have a body property that returns some view. As you can see here, our content view structure does indeed satisfy that rule. So that's why it conforms to the view protocol. So now that you understand what protocols are, you can see that the data type for this body property is actually any value that conforms to the view protocol. Yes, in this case, the data type for this property isn't actually a data type, but it's actually any data type that conforms to a certain protocol, in this case, the view protocol. So inside of this code for this computed property, it needs to return some instance that conforms to the view protocol. Let's open up this code and see what we have. So what do we have here? Well, we have a single code statement. And remember what I said about computed properties. If it's only a single code statement, then you can omit the return keyword. But I'm going to explicitly specify it so that it's clear for you. So what's happening here, it looks like we are creating an instance of a text structure. Now, one way to figure that out is if you go into the utilities pane or the inspector pane, and you go into the quick help tab right here, and you just put your cursor over the thing you want to look at. So I'm going to click into this text. So as you can see here, Indeed, text is a structure. So we are creating an instance of the text structure. However, you'll notice that creating this instance is different from how we did it before because we used an empty set of parentheses. Here, when we're creating an instance of this text structure, we're passing in some input data. So yes, you can actually pass in input data as a parameter into the creation of an instance of a structure. These are called initializers. Now, we haven't talked about that yet, and we will in upcoming lessons, but for now, just understand that there is a way for you to pass in input data into the creation of an instance of a structure. So that's exactly what's happening right here. Now, you might be wondering, does this text structure conform to the Vue protocol? Well, it must, right? Because according to this body property, whatever is returned for this computed property has to conform to this. So again, let's dive into the quick help. So I'm going to hover over text. I'm going to go down, and in fact, I'm going to open up the developer documentation. Now, if you're using, I think Xcode 12.1, there was a bug that crashed when you tried to open this window. So you just have to update Xcode if this crashes for you. Okay, so this is the documentation for text. You can see that it is a structure. And if you scroll all the way down, I'm going to skip all this stuff because I want to just show you that it conforms to two protocols actually. But what we're interested in is it does conform to the Vue protocol. All right, and another thing I want to point out is that this, remember this from early on, this is a modifier. And now to you, it must look pretty familiar, right? Because it looks like we're calling a method. This is dot notation right here. We are creating an instance of the text structure, and then we're calling the padding method on that instance. See, if I put it on the same line, it might look a little more familiar for you, right? So I hope the dots are starting to connect, no pun intended. Okay, so to relate this back to the previous structures lesson where I showed you how to declare a structure, we had a couple of different sections, right? So at the top here, we would declare our properties. And in fact, this body property is considered a property, right? But it also contains our Vue code. So this would be where our Vue code goes. And then down here, we would declare the methods for this structure. Okay, so I think you understand that this structure called content view represents the main view or the main screen of this app. But didn't we say that structures by themselves don't really do anything? You need to create an instance of it for it to work. Well, where are we creating an instance of content view? Well, for that, we need to drill back up to the entry point of the app, which is this right here. So you can see this by itself is also a structure, and the name of this structure is the name of your project, and it conforms to a protocol called app. So let's look at the quick help and see what this app protocol is all about. Create an app by declaring a structure that conforms to the app protocol. Implement the required body computed property to define the app's content. Now we have another body computed property. I'm going to skip over some of this scene and window group stuff. I want to point out that this is where we are creating an instance of that content view structure. So do you see how everything fits together? Furthermore, let's go back to content view and let me show you something else. So for this, I'm going to open up the canvas again, and I'm going to resume the preview. Look at this structure down here. This is what is powering the preview that you see here. This structure isn't really used as part of your app. It's only for previewing in the canvas right here. So it conforms to the preview provider protocol, and it's got a property called previews. Static keyword, ignore for now. We'll explain that in a future lesson. And down here, you can see that an instance of your content view structure is being created, and that's actually what's being shown here. In fact, I can apply modifiers to this instance, and it's going to change what we have here. Right, so I can use dot notation to call modifiers, which now you know are just methods, right, of that view or of that instance. Actually, instead of doing that, why don't we use the visual way and see how it changes the code? So why don't I preview this actually, I'm going to change the scheme to dark mode. So you can see it adds a modifier to that instance. Let's also change the device to iPod Touch. You can see it adds another modifier called preview device. Now, what happens if I create another preview? Because you can click on this button right here and it's going to create another preview down here. You can see what happens to the code. Well, it created another instance of content view, and it's got its own modifiers. Now, this is grouped together by a container, a view container called group, which we haven't really covered yet, but we will in the future. Just know that it groups together views. So this instance of content view is for this one up here, and this instance is this one down here. See, I can change this scheme to light, and you can see it changes that here. And I can change this device to iPhone 12, and it changes that modifier there. So they're independent instances. Phew, that was a lot to take in, and that's why I never recommend for you to memorize anything. The more practice you get, the sooner it's going to become second nature to you. Let's do a quick recap, shall we? You learned how to create instances of your structure. You learned how to use dot notation to access the methods and the properties of your instances. And you also learned about access levels, so you can control which properties and which methods can be accessed with dot notation. Finally, you saw how all of these concepts relate back to a SwiftUI app in Xcode. Now you know what I'm going to say next. Reinforce your learnings with the quiz and get hands-on practice with the challenge. And hey, if you don't feel like you need the challenge, do it anyways, just to prove me wrong. Now in the following lessons, we're going to go back to our war card game and take all of this newfound Swift knowledge and bring that war card game to life. Just a note, in case this is the first lesson you're watching, you can access all of the quizzes and challenges and extra resources over on our learning platform. Just go to CodeWithChris.com, click on Try for Free, and enroll in the 14-day beginner challenge, and you'll find all of the materials there. Now, if you're excited to see the next lesson, like me, then make sure you're subscribed to the channel and make sure you turn on bell notifications so you don't miss it. In the next lesson, I'll show you how to use the button element to handle user interaction. All right, I'll see you there.